Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The U.S. government continues to deal with a deluge of unaccompanied migrant children crossing into the U.S. illegally. Here in D.C., President Barack Obama is meeting growing resistance on Capitol Hill to his multi-billion-dollar emergency spending measure for the border. Democrats are expressing opposition to any changes to a 2008 anti-trafficking law that prevents Central American illegal migrant children from being turned back at the border, as is the case with Mexican children who enter the U.S. illegally. This, even though the law is widely viewed as a major contributor to the current crisis. Among the Republican proposals being considered in return for support of the spending measure, National Guard deployment to shore up the Mexican border, expedited processing to quickly return migrants to their home country. And Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said he would seek to repeal President Obama's 2012 executive order that allows some immigrants brought here as youths to stay in the U.S. Republicans contend that that policy is partly responsible for the current crisis by creating the perception that youths can stay in the U.S. no matter their status. Across the United States and throughout localities, they're expressing their displeasure with federal plans to bus migrants into their neighborhoods. Following the lead of protesters in Murrieta, California, who turned away busloads of immigrants this past week, demonstrations have sprung up in Arizona, New Mexico, Michigan, Texas, Virginia, and Washington State. The governors of Iowa, Nebraska, and Maryland have also spoken out against the federal program. Meanwhile, Pope Francis is weighing in on the migration crisis in the Americas. In a message delivered Wednesday to a joint Mexico-Vatican colloquium on the issue, Francis called for urgent intervention for these unaccompanied children who emigrate under extreme conditions and in pursuit of a hope that in most cases turns out to be in vain. The Pope said that these children should be welcomed and protected in this humanitarian emergency. This alone, however, will not be sufficient. He continued, needed are policies that inform people about the dangers of such a journey, and above all, policies that promote development in their countries of origin. In a gesture of the Holy See's deep interest in the crisis, Pope Francis sent Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin to the Mexico City gathering. While there, Cardinal Parolin also met with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. More on this in our next segment. Another papal interview, another Vatican clarification. The director of the Holy See Press Office, Father Federico Lombardi, has questioned the accuracy of statements attributed to Pope Francis in the July 13th edition of the Italian newspaper La Repubblica. Pope Francis spoke with 90-year-old Italian journalist Eugenio Scalfari for an hour. Scalfari, an atheist, notorious for not taking notes and reconstructing interviews from memory, touched on several topics. According to Scalfari, the Pope said, quote, "The level of pedophilia in the church is at about 2%, end quote. He added, again, according to Scalfari, pedophiles include, quote, bishops and cardinals and others more numerous know about it but keep silent. On priestly celibacy, the Pope reportedly said, the problem of celibacy certainly exists, but not to a great extent. There are solutions, and I will find them. Father Lombardi said that the interview, the overall theme of the article captures the spirit of the conversation between the Holy Father and Scalfari. However, the individual's expressions that were used and the manner in which they were reported cannot be attributed to the Pope. This is the third interview the Pope has granted to Scalfari and the third Vatican rebuttal or clarification. House Republicans are moving forward with their plans to sue President Obama for exceeding his constitutional powers. On Wednesday, expert attorneys appeared before the House Rules Committee, which is considering GOP-written legislation authorizing a House lawsuit. Speaker John Boehner has said that legal action is warranted because Obama has abused his authority in carrying out laws passed by Congress. He specifically points to delaying what has become known as the employer mandate in Obamacare, the requirement that certain employers provide medical coverage for their employees. The GOP also takes issue with Obama's unilateral actions to curb emissions from coal-fired power plants, raising the minimum wage for federal contractors, and the aforementioned executive order blocking the deportation of youths brought into the U.S. illegally. Meanwhile, Democrats are moving forward with their plans to exploit the so-called war on women. On Tuesday, the Senate Judiciary Committee considered legislation that would roll back state abortion restrictions. Supporters of the Women's Health Protection Act say the bill aims at eliminating state regulations that masquerade as making abortion safer, but are really just roadblocks to abortion services. During the past 3 years, states have passed more than 200 laws restricting or regulating abortion. The bill has 36 Democrat sponsors. It's not expected to pass out of the Senate. And on Wednesday, Democrat-sponsored legislation that would have, in effect, nullified the U.S. Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision was defeated. Dubbed the Not My Boss's Business Act by proponents, the bill fell 4 votes short of the 60 necessary to proceed. It would have ensured contraceptive access for women who get their health insurance from companies with religious objections. GOP senators said Wednesday's vote was simply a political stunt designed to energize female voters and boost vulnerable Democratic incumbents this November. And the Catholic bishops in England are warning against a proposed euthanasia bill being considered by the House of Lords. The legislation would allow doctors in England and Wales to prescribe lethal doses of drugs to terminally ill patients who request them and who are judged to have less than 6 months to live. Current law punishes assisted suicide by up to 14 years in prison. Bishop Philip Egan of Portsmouth said its passage would mark the catastrophic collapse of respect for the infinite value of each human life and each human person, no matter how weak or vulnerable. Prime Minister David Cameron also expressed his worry, saying people might be pushed into things that they don't actually want for themselves. The bill's second reading in the House of Lords is scheduled for Friday. Big changes are coming to the Church of England. On Monday, the Church's General Synod overwhelmingly voted in favor of allowing women bishops. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said he was delighted with the historic vote and that the long-awaited change marks the completion of a process that started more than 20 years ago, when the Church first ordained women priests. 2 other moves away from tradition were also approved this week. Now an alternative version of the baptismal rite will be available, one that strikes mention of the devil, and liturgical vestments will be optional. Vicars can now celebrate services in street clothes or civvies, be it skirts or blue jeans. Catholic Archbishop Bernard Longley, head of England and Wales Dialogue and Unity Committee, said that the decision on women's bishops sadly places a further obstacle on the path to this unity between us. More about this later in the show. And back in the U.S., Elaine Stritch, the hilarious and irascible legend of Broadway screen and television, died in Michigan on Thursday. She was 89. Stritch garnered 3 Emmy Awards for her work on 30 Rock, where she played Alec Baldwin's mother, but she was best known for her stage work. She appeared in the original production of Stephen Sondheim's musical Company, and later won a Tony for her freewheeling one-woman show, Elaine Stritch at Liberty. Many didn't realize that the entertainer was the niece of the former Archbishop of Chicago, Samuel Cardinal Stritch. A few years back, I sat down with Elaine for what would be one of her last interviews. Just before one of her shows, I asked her how she'd like to be remembered. Her response was typical Stritch.
As somebody who cares enough about her career and entertaining an audience so that she can level with her interviewer before the show that she's got to go. That's how I want to be remembered. And tell the truth. How about that?
Thank you.
She was a character, and then some. Everybody rise. May Elaine Stritch rest in peace. You know, I'm often asked what was the most difficult interview I ever conducted. Hands down, it was Stritch. You'll see why next week when we air the full interview. And July 17th would have been the 24th birthday of poet and peace activist Matty Stepanek. He died 10 years ago after a lifelong battle with muscular dystrophy. The Matty Stepanek Foundation has been leading an effort to petition President Obama to declare July 17th Matty J.T. Stepanek Peace Day. The foundation got a little boost on Thursday. Maryland Senators Barbara Mikulski and Ben Cardin introduced a resolution for Congress to declare July 17th Matty's Peace Day. The nation's lawmakers will take up the resolution later this summer. You can visit mattyonline.com to sign the petition and support the effort.